welcome to That Implementation Science Podcast, the show that aims to reduce the innovation to implementation gap to 16 and a half years. I'm your host, Mike Pullman, and on today's show, co-host Kevin King and I talk with Sara Landes about how she became interested in implementation science, her work in the Department of Veterans Affairs, hybrid trials, and her fond memories of a special rental car company. Then we get Sara started on a rant about hybrid trial reviews. This one was a blast to record. I think you're really going to like it. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to That Implementation Science Podcast. I'm Mike Pullman.
And I'm Kevin King.
And today we're so excited to be here with Dr. Sara Landes. She is an associate professor at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, a clinical psychologist for the Central Arkansas Veterans Healthcare System, the director of the Behavioral Health Quality Enhancement Research Initiative, or the QUERY program. She's core faculty at the Center for Implementation Research at the University of Arkansas and past president of the Society for Implementation Research Collaboration. I think she's our second past president that we've had, as well as Byron Powell. Dr. Landes' work focuses on implementation of suicide prevention and evidence-based treatments within large healthcare systems. Sara, it's so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I feel like you should also say, and she's tired.
And she's tired. That's right. We heard that you're implementing some sleep interventions last night for a sick kid.
Yeah, definitely.
How does that differ, implementing something within a large healthcare system versus implementing something for your own child?
I have policies to support me in large systems. And sometimes people respect those policies, but toddlers don't care about policy. So
I'm curious, how similar are the tantrums that you experience between toddlers and stakeholders when you do implement, system-wide policies, whether it's around bedtime or evidence-based practices?
Yeah. My partners don't bite. So, which is quite delightful. They're better behaved.
That is a big
That
difference.
is nice. The biting is always a challenge, especially in a work environment.
Well, we're so happy to have you here today, Sara. I'm kind of curious if you could just start a little bit by telling us about how you found yourself in the world of implementation science.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I know you both are at University of Washington. So in 2007, I went to University of Washington for internship and then did postdoc. And my goal, I came there, I was doing treatment intervention research focused on suicide prevention, doing a lot of dialectical behavior therapy. And so I was keen to go to Seattle, the home of DBT, to work with Kate Comtois and Marshall Linehan. And so I did a research rotation, and my goal was to do, I say this very vaguely, research on DBT and picture like shiny-faced, naive intern. And my mentor was kind enough to say, yeah, we don't really need more data on does DBT work. So what's your plan? So I drove home and I cried. I called my best friend and I was like, I don't even have a plan. And she said, she's not that sweet. So she said some swear words to me and told me to come up with a plan. So I did some thinking and I was doing a lot of DBT work. I was running the resident clinic.
Wait. I have a question. Is that kind of a DBT approach for her to
It totally
to have
is.
taken with you?
Yeah, she's a nurse. She doesn't do DBT, but she's very irreverent, very direct, and was like, cut the crap is the nice way of saying it. And stop crying and go get a plan. Like get it together, Landes, was the message.
Speaking of effective interventions, I think stop crying and calm down have about equal efficacy in most interpersonal interactions. So to be honest, it's pretty impressive that it worked on you.
It actually worked. It was actually what I needed. It was the verbal equivalent of a slap in the face to like regroup. Um, so I did a lot of thinking. I was running the resident clinic for DBT. And Seattle's the home of DBT. And what I found was I could have filled 5 resident clinics. The demand for DBT, the need for DBT was so high, and there was no access. And I was like, how am I in the home of DBT and there's no bleeping access to DBT? Like,
Kate,
there's all these cool clinics, right? In the city, there's Marsha's clinic, there's Kate's clinic, there's all of these fantastic places that offer this service, and there's too much demand for it. There's not enough access.
can you explain what a resident clinic is?
Sure, sure. So, Kate Comtois ran a resident clinic where psychiatry and psychology residents who are interns get to provide the treatment while getting supervision. So it's a way of getting the training for
Right.
residents and interns while also increasing access to a service. So it's literally adding a whole extra DBT clinic. And I could have filled minimum of 3 clinics. And I only had space for 1 clinic. And I
A-
thought, go ahead.
And do you mean both in terms of like providers that wanted to learn it and people that needed the treatment?
No, is more, I can't remember how many providers I had. I think we had
Hmm.
like maybe 10 at maximum
Hmm.
each year. But for each person who could have taken 1 to 2 patients, I probably had 5 patients that wanted their slots.
Right.
So folks struggling with self-harm, suicide, borderline personality disorder. So folks who would have been appropriate for the treatment, and I couldn't get them access. Uh, and I was like, how is this possible, right? I can see how this was possible in other places I'd lived, right? In Milwaukee, St. Louis, where DBT wasn't as big of a thing. But I thought, how do we not have access in Seattle? And so I was doing some research and some Googling and some reading, and I was like, oh, there's this thing called implementation science. How do we get things that work to people that need them? So that was what, 2007? I think some of like the query special issues in implementation science had just come out. So like talking all about query, the Department of Veterans Affairs Quality Enhancement Research Initiative. It's all about getting things that work into practice. And Implementation Research Institute, I think, had just come out. Maybe it had been out a year or two. And I was like, there's this thing and it's implementation. And so I took it to my mentor and I said, this is my jam. Like I want to figure out why can't we get people DBT? How do we get people DBT? And I think for me it was a good fit because not to be down on myself, I'm not innovative, I'm practical. And I think implementation science fit my practical side of there's a thing that works, people need it. How do we get it to them? And there's a science behind it. And so I was totally hooked. Wrote an IMH F32, so a training grant to fund my postdoc with Kate Comtois to start doing that work, and then actually helped write the was an R13 that funded CIRC. What was originally the Seattle, what were we before? The Seattle Implementation
Research Conference.
Research Conference. There we go. So I was a postdoc that wrote, helping write the grant that funded what's now CIRC. And so I was all of a sudden, I went from, crying in my apartment to my best friend to having like this space where I thought this is what I want to do. And I was in the right place too. I was with Kate and she was asking these questions. And so we got to develop CIRC. So it was just the right time and place for me.
So I just want to clarify. So Kate Comtois made you cry.
No,
Then
I cried because of the reality of what she said. She was so kind, and I actually didn't tell her for maybe a decade actually that I cried after that meeting. And she was horrified. She was like, "Oh, what?" And I said, "You were so kind, but like the reality was hitting me of I don't have a plan." And to this day, she tells people that story because she goes, well, you came back with a plan though. I asked you for a plan, and she said, not everybody comes back with a plan, and you had a plan and you funded a grant for your plan. But it was a clear, kind feedback and a
Yes.
question.
So
She did
Kate
not
told
make me cry.
Kate told you Kate told you this reality and you cried. And
Yes.
then your friend slapped you in the face. And then you discovered implementation science as a possible solution to this reality. And then you introduced Kate to that idea of implementation science, or she was kind of thinking about that as well, and you guys kind of brought this together. This is really fascinating because Cirque then started as a result of this, as you pointed out,
Yeah.
and then has now become this the professional organization that
International.
really has a massive influence on implementation science throughout the nation.
Yeah, I think Kate was asking similar questions. It was kind of this nice confluence of events that she was thinking about it. I had this question, so she was my mentor to write the F-32. University of Washington had a grant writing seminar for interns, and so I used that. I got to get an internal review and like feedback from folks like Maria Monroe DeVita, who, I got grant feedback. I got to submit this grant, and this is still when, you had to print 7 copies and you couldn't staple them and you had to mail them. And, we rode horses to work and the
Which
old
was really
days.
uncomfortable in downtown Seattle. There were so few places to tie them up, but only way to get there was
Totally,
horses.
totally. But it was an incredible place to end up, given that I was worried that I had not planned well for my future, to be quite honest, to end up being able to help write this conference grant and see Cirque grow. And I actually am the one who incorporated and did all the paperwork to make us a nonprofit entity, which I don't actually recommend doing. It was quite a bit of work. So, to go from a thing we worked on in Kate's living room to now what is now international. I can't remember. I think we have 20 countries represented at Cirque. It's a little strange, to be quite honest.
Yeah,
It's cool.
that's fascinating. And I think there are probably many mentors right now listening to this episode who are justifying making their mentees cry. So this is good. You can help them with that as a little, yeah.
It seems like it's really, like you said, a really interesting and fortunate collision of multiple factors, right? That you got to DBT, into the heart of DBT at a point where they were like, we don't need any more DBT research. And you came to Seattle, which also had a really thriving, or up and coming, I guess at the time, but it became thriving implementation research community, and then kind of got plugged into that. And like you said, you really saw a gap that you were passionate about, and worked to fill it. I mean, I just think that's, I think, like you said, I think it's a commentary on your ability to spot and identify places where innovation could, where they could really benefit from an innovation. And I also think for trainees and anybody who's listening, a reminder that our careers are not necessarily linear and planned out. And sometimes it's about being prepared and then ready to take on the opportunities when it occurs, or when they occur, being right place, right time, and, right person. I think clearly you were the right person to take advantage of that.
And I think the twists and turns, because I think if I go back further, right? So I was going to go to medical school. I got kicked out of the pre-med scholars program when I was an undergrad because I met alcohol. So I got kicked out of that program, switched gears to psychology, applied to 15 graduate schools and got rejected by all of them. Worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and then went and got my master's, and then went to graduate school for my PhD. So I kind of had this, I think folks see you in your CV at the end and they're like, oh, that's rad. And you think, oh, you don't know all of the like, oh, my life is over moments that we all go through. I assume we all go through them, that to get to those places and being able to adjust course. It's to me, it's really helpful. I wish there's a place on your CV of like major catastrophes, right? that I have survived.
That's a great
Would
idea.
be a great spot, right, on your CV.
And I think it also, just thinking reflectively on career stuff, I think it also prepares you and reflects what happens throughout your career, right? Because it's not just about, one success after another. In fact, Mike and I were talking before we started recording about how sometimes academia is sort of like you get a major win and then you get to ride that high for about 4 hours before you have to keep working and move on to, either the next rejection or the next try. And it's at least I'm actually curious for you, what keeps you going in the face of all that?
That's an interesting question. What keeps me, I mean, part of it, I always, my ultimate goal, even, with going to medical school and then switching to psychology is I want to help people in some way, right? And so it's like, how can I do that? If it's not medical school, I also learned that I don't like blood, which is really bad news for medical school. And so a lot of times I think, okay, well, this didn't work. Try again. So I grew up with a Marine and a city planner. And the household motto would have been plan your work, work your plan. And so I think I often had support to then come up with a plan, right? Whether it's my best friend, verbally slapping me in the face saying, make a plan, get it together, like be sad for a minute and then regroup. So I think I've had, kind of this mission to help people to support me and help me, cry and get over it, including you, Kevin. I mean, there's been, I think I've cried at your house multiple times, and having friends to support you and then also friends to be like, okay, that time's over, get it together. So I think all of those things for me have helped me to keep going and figure out how can I take what I know to get stuff that works to help people.
Yeah.
Kevin,
I mean,
it sounds to me very clearly that Sara has grit.
Mike, I thought we promised not to talk about that construct here. I mean, I think what we could say from a classic, personality perspective is that she is high in perseverance, which is a facet of conscientiousness. And I think that that's very clear. Those of you who are really interested, maybe we'll record a special episode on my feelings about grit, and then we'll just delete it at the end. Sara, one of the things you have been very persistent about is implementing DBT throughout the VA and now sort of nationally rolling it out. Could you describe for our listeners what you've done?
Yeah. So I like the term grit. I'll use perseverance. This has been a long, hard slog. So when I came to the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, I got here, speaking of the VA in 2010. And when I got there, I thought, okay, one of my goals is to get DBT to veterans who need it. Because my perception was that there wasn't a lot of DBT in the VA, and folks told me, oh, there's only 3 places. VA is a national healthcare system, 139 medical centers. I can't remember how many facilities that includes. And I thought 3 of 139 is pathetic. And I thought, I'm not really sure I believe that number, though, at the same time. So I got a query grant. And this was, so in 2012, I think query had a different structure and query programs. So mental health query at the time, which was in Little Rock, where I am now, funded smaller projects. So they were a program that could then fund projects. And so I got one of the smaller projects funded to do a national survey of the VA. And so I had, on the side, to be quite honest, created an internal website. We used SharePoint in the VA, and you could create these SharePoint sites for different evidence-based practices. And DBT didn't have one. And I had a mentor who happened to be the director of web-based services for mental health. And he was like, go ahead and make one. We'll worry about it later. And so I built this SharePoint of DBT resources and tried to identify all of the DBT places in the country. I identified 52 places, not 3, that had some form of DBT. So DBT has 4 modes of treatment: group, individual, therapist consultation team, and phone coaching. And so I tried to identify sites that had any of them. So they might just have skills group, they might just do individual, they might have the whole shebang. And so I created this list and had this website and had all these resources for people. And now I had this list. So I used my query grant to do a survey. So we did a quantitative survey of kind of a lay of the land. Like, what do you offer? Are you offering it to fidelity? Like, are you doing the things we think you should be doing? We had a barriers checklist that we modified to be more dynamic of, it's not a barrier, it's a barrier we already overcame. It's one we're working on. It's one like it's never going to happen. We're not going to overcome it. And then facilitators, we also asked about like what benefits do you get from doing DBT? 52 of 52 sites responded to the survey, which baffles me to this day. And then we did qualitative interviews with high adopters and low adopters. So sites that had gone and did the whole shebang and sites that had only done one or two. And we did interviews with therapists and administrators at each site and really got a good handle on why are most places doing just group? What are the things that get in the way? What benefit are you getting for doing all this work, right? And people were saying there were benefits to patients, but benefits to them as staff, benefits to the system. They were saying things like, if I get these veterans into DBT, it helps them reduce their use of other services, which then increases access for other veterans to those services. So we had this great lay of the land. We knew that it wasn't 3 places across the country. It was 52. And so that was in 2012. And between 2012 and about 2019 or 20, I tried really hard to get VA rolled out nationally. I got requests from central office to build proposals. I wrote these really great proposals. Nothing happened. I wrote another great proposal. Nothing happened. And I often say, I'm just gonna keep asking them until they just give up because they're so tired of me asking them. Which I guess would be right. That's perseverance. I'm more tenacious than they are. I'm more annoying than they are. Like, I will just keep asking until you give in. And so we wrote a couple papers from that survey and qualitative data. Some nice papers. 2012, 2017, one just came out, I think, in 2019, because, in the land of papers, that's what happens. And I'm going to pause there for a minute, because the other thing that happened, we mentioned kind of right place at the right time. In my first job at the National Center for PTSD, I was their implementation person, but we did a lot of education tasks, and I got assigned to things that weren't really my jam, but I had enough knowledge to do. So developing courses for employee assistance program providers about veterans and some other things. And they were national initiatives, and the people I reported to were in VA central office. So I actually got to know all these folks in VA central office. And so I started getting these connections and knowing the people who I could be like, hey, hi, have you heard of DBT? Can I interest you in DBT? Would you like to buy DBT? Right? Like, really just being somewhat of a rude guest sometimes of like, let me tell you about this thing you didn't ask about. So I had kind of that in the background of getting these connections. And so in 2019, they published revised clinical practice guidelines for treatment of suicide. DBT had been in the 2012 guidelines for the first time, and then they were in the revised 2019 guidelines. And at the same time, VA was trying to figure out, how do we improve suicide prevention for veterans in VA and outside VA? And so they have this initiative called Suicide Prevention 2.0. It uses a public health approach, and it has a community arm, so doing things to intervene in the community, and it has a clinical arm. The clinical arm is all about implementing suicide prevention specific interventions from the clinical practice guidelines in what we call clinical resource hubs. I refer to them as telehealth hubs. So VA has 18 regions, there's 18 clinical resource hubs. And so they had a work group put together to figure out, what are we going to implement for suicide prevention in these clinical resource hubs? And I was at that table. And I think part of it was because I had been like, hi. And I had been connected enough to people and had done enough work So I was able to be in that work group to help push forward that DBT should be one of those evidence-based practices. And what was nice, because it was in the clinical practice guideline and had good data, it wasn't like I pushed it forward. It was already on the table. But what was nice is I got to be involved and have helped create the training program for it. And so now we're actually pushing it forward. So we went from, new faculty person, first year in a real grown-up job in 2010. And this didn't start moving until 2019, 2020. So, it only took 10 years of being like, hi,
I
do you
mean,
want to buy
that's
this cool treatment?
7 years faster than usual, so not bad.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, hey, we're getting speedy.
Yeah. Well, so the Department of Veterans Affairs, I just learned, is the second largest federal department after the Department of Defense. And I might guess that it's because of its topic area that it brings a lot of the same kind of structures as the Department of Defense. And, when I think about the Department of Defense, I this is just scuttlebutt and hearsay, so I could be completely wrong about this. But it seems like the type of agency that takes a long time to make a decision. But when it finally makes that decision, things get implemented very quickly because of the command structure. And but I guess I would ask is that does that resonate with your experience? And just more broadly, what are the kind of specific kinds of implementation challenges that might meet you in a system like the VA?
Yeah. And I should have said this before I did my spiel about DBT. All of these are my views. I don't represent the VA or the federal government, which I'm sure they are grateful for. I feel like I don't know enough about DoD to say if VA is like that. I don't have a sense. In VA, it doesn't seem like things are ordered and so it happens. That's not my sense. Although I think sometimes that happens. When they implemented the new treatment for hepatitis C that was curative, that seemed like this will happen, and it happened, which was incredible. I don't think that's the standard, though. VA is a cool place to be, and I think you have to be a certain type of person to say that. I like structure and order. I like to know how things are going to go. I actually want to know what the rules are, and I usually follow them. So a place like VA that has lots of structure and rules is actually a place where I do well. I've seen other colleagues who don't do well in those places, and VA is not their jam. So I think I like it there. It's an awesome mission. I like that we get to serve veterans. You can't see on my camera, but I have my dad's flag behind me. I have Marine Corps dad, Navy, and Army grandpa. So, very military background. So I like working there. And I think oftentimes, though, you have levers you don't normally have to pull, right? So for the Suicide Prevention 2.0 initiative, they've decided this is a top priority, which means it doesn't just mean someone has said, y'all need to do this, but it means there's money. It means there's leadership saying, here's funds, hire people to do this thing. Their supervisors have them to do this thing because that's what they're paid for. We already have a national infrastructure, right? VA has been doing telehealth, I don't know for how long, but for a really long time, way before COVID. So we have this huge infrastructure already. We have a lot of resources that I think other systems don't have. And with a large system, things don't move as fast, right? You have to get, levels of approval, and I can't jump over somebody in the hierarchy to get approval. I have to kind of make my way through the chain. So I think there's lots of opportunities because there's structure, and if what you're working on fits within the priorities, right? So a lot of my grants have been suicide prevention focused. Suicide prevention is a top clinical priority, which is likely not a surprise, right? My grants are kind of easy to write. I say suicide is bad, right? No one argues with me. So my topic area is high priority, which means time, effort, funding go towards that priority. And so I think we just have a lot more levers to pull to get things done. And it also means if your thing isn't the priority, there's a lot more levers that aren't movable for you. So I can see how it would be a blessing and a curse depending on what you're trying to do and what climate you're in at the time, right? So your priorities might change.
I'm hearing you say I identify a lot of advantages that you have in a big like interconnected system like the VA. Like you said, when they decide to do something, there's a lot of resources that sort of smooth a lot of the barriers that might be barriers in other systems for implementation. And yet it still took, 10 years to get to the point where they flipped the switch. So can you talk about, and to me, I mean, it seems like the evidence was no different in 2010 than it was in 2020 about the efficacy of DBT. So I guess, this is, I first want to hear about your sort of personal experience. And then I think we also want to hear about the research you've done as a result of that or through the VA. But first, it sounds like you weren't using research to, like you weren't doing research to convince them necessarily. You were just trying to sort of, hey, DBT could be effective for this. DBT could work. Is that accurate? And sort of what do you think it was that eventually wore them down to take it on? Because my sense from the suicide prevention literature is it's not like there's a lot of effective treatments out there, right? It's not like you're
Yeah.
picking from 20 antidepressants, and you're just trying to figure out which one's marginally better. People have been complaining about how hard it is to even predict suicide for 20 years, and that's not gotten any better. So what do you think what was the barriers? What was the process like of trying to convince folks that, hey, we have something we think actually works?
Yeah. I don't think it was a question of does it work? That wasn't the barrier. The work I did was to help say what's the barrier to implementing it, and it wasn't evidence. It was time, resources, some perceptions that weren't always accurate. Things like we don't have veterans with borderline personality disorder. Men don't have borderline personality disorder. Both false, just for the record. Things like DBT's hefty, right? So it's a year-long treatment. It has 4 modes of treatment. It's not everybody's thing as a therapist, right? So it's not always easy to find folks who want to do DBT as a treatment. And there was a perception of this intervention, this thing is too bulky and we're not convinced there's enough need in the system for it. And I also think it wasn't clear in the EBP training program in VA under mental health, those were kind of selected. And then I think for a while there wasn't enough budget to expand it. And so I would hear, well, that's suicide prevention's thing. And then suicide prevention would say, well, that's psychotherapy's thing. They're the one, so for a while I felt a little like there was, we go through periods in VA where there's lots of money and no money. Budgets are nice and then they're lean. And so I think that was a part of it. I wasn't sure who should own it. It always seemed of interest, right? Like I got asked to write proposals for DBT training program. Well, I should look in my files, right? All the different dates of when
Sometimes that's a
those.
terrible idea.
I know it's a horrible idea. So there was interest. And I think you can implement other things faster and easier than DBT. It's not an immediate win.
Yeah. So in a sense, people there were thinking, oh, this isn't a right fit for our clients or our patients. This isn't a right fit for our therapists. In fact, this isn't a right fit for our system. And so it sounds like a lot of the work you had to do was to sort of change all of all those perceptions.
Or it's too expensive.
Yeah,
right?
or too expensive, too bulky.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think, given all these experiences, what do you think implementation science has to offer health system quality that sort of goes beyond the typical quality assurance, quality improvement, program evaluation? Because I'm assuming there's lots of those there. What do you think implementation science adds to those efforts?
I think part of it is all of the strategies to actually get stuff implemented, right? So we can do program evaluation of things that VA is implementing. One of the cool things I've seen though, so behavioral health query, which is our program here in Little Rock, that I now lead, which is kind of cool. I went from being an intern and reading papers about query and thinking, oh, those sound like my people. And now I get to lead the program. We partner, all of our projects are partnered. So we've partnered with central office folks. We're helping them learn what implementation science is. And it's like, you all do a lot to get stuff out. Here's some more evidence-based ways of getting them out. We have an implementation facilitation learning hub where folks can come learn facilitation as a strategy. One of my partners in central office, he has been to that training 5 times. We've told him he can't come anymore because he's been 5 times already.
He's sitting up with front and raising his hand all the time.
Like,
I know.
He gets his staff trained in it now. He uses it to help get things implemented. And so I feel like we've given him something to be more focused or targeted with the resources he has to get things implemented. So I feel like that's what implementation science in my mind adds to the work of like quality assurance or QI or programming, but that we're giving, the theories and frameworks are nice to help structure how we're thinking about things. And I think the strategies are more, or we get more bang for our buck.
Well, this has been so interesting hearing you talk about your experience at the VA and about how implementation science can play a role there. I know some of your other work has been focused on methodology, specifically hybrid trials, and I know a lot of our audience is really interested in this. Can you maybe begin by just kind of describing what a hybrid trial is and what's the current state of the literature on using hybrid trials?
Sure. And we're going to stop saying trials. I didn't tell you that ahead of time. We're saying hybrid design or hybrid approaches. Actually, hybrid approach is better than hybrid design even. Hybrid approach, hybrid study. So
and why is that? Why is that? I know we started saying smart designs because the T in the smart is trial. They don't want to be redundant.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Whoopsies.
Yeah.
Whoopsies. Well, so effectiveness, implementation, hybrid studies or approaches. It's a way of if you think about it as an approach rather than a design or a trial, right? The idea is you have a thing that you want to implement or see if it works. And if you're going to see if the thing works, you might also want to see if it's implementable or what might get in your way. You'd hate to have a thing that works so well that everybody's like, I'm not doing that. Buzz off, right? Not a chance. You've now wasted time, money, effort, your life.
Wait, hang on. Do people really say buzz off in real life?
I'm trying kind of hard not to say bad words. Jeff Curran told me to quote unquote swear lightly. And so I'm trying to be on my best behavior.
I'm impressed.
So I said buzz off instead of what I would normally say.
Yes, fair point.
Buzz off. It sounds so calm.
Buzz off, would ya?
Buzz off.
I feel like you have to have that 1930s accent.
Right? I need Jeff Curran's Boston accent to pull that off. But he wouldn't say buzz off either, let's be honest. Right? So hybrid approaches are looking at both questions at the same time. If you're looking to see if a thing works, if you're going to do a clinical trial, it's a great time to also see you're really doing implementation strategies without doing implementation strategies, right? If you're paying therapists to do the thing, if you're blocking their clinic, if you're doing fidelity checks, those are all implementation strategies. So you can see what else is needed. If I do all of these things and we still can't get this done in a clinic, we have my clinical trial's doomed, right? I've now found out there's some things I need to fix even to get my clinical trial done. And I've now seen, here's some things I might need to figure out if I'm going to actually implement this, if it works. So I know y'all talk about kind of like shortening that time frame to get things implemented. So rather than doing a 4 to 5 year clinical trial, okay, now we know my thing works. Now I'm going to write another grant to see if I can get the thing implemented. And if I had already looked at those implementation processes or variables in my clinical trial, I might already then know, okay, these are barriers I need to address. These are strategies I might use. So the idea is to shorten the time frame and really capitalize on information you already have access to. I think good clinical trialists do this already. They may not know it's implementation science, but they're paying attention to those things that are happening to make sure their study goes well and to help them in the next iteration. So hybrid approaches, and we say hybrid approach or study, so because it's not always a clinical trial. You might be doing, and when we say hybrid design, people were getting so flummoxed. They would be like, well, my research design is a hybrid. It's like, well, no. What's your actual research design? Is it a stepped wedge? Is it pre-post? Is it, you need a research design. And so I think us calling it a hybrid design made it confusing to people who are especially new to this because they're like, well, how do I now have two designs? How do I have a stepped wedge and this design? So it's really about the questions that you're asking and the approach. So Jeff Kern and I and some others have a paper that came out. It came out for 2022 now or 2023. It's a 10-year reflection. It must have been 2022 because his paper came out in 2012. Looking back on 10 years of hybrids, and part of it's okay. Our language is a little sloppy. We're confusing people by calling it design. Giving some guidance on, we have a hybrid type 1, 2, and 3, which I really like because it's simple, right? A hybrid 1, the main focus is, does the thing work? With a little bit of implementation. Hybrid 3 on the other side is, can I get it implemented? Does my implementation strategy work? With a little bit of, does it still work? Does the thing still work? And type 2, which is my favorite, that everybody else seems to not like, to be quite honest, is a mix of both. Co-primary questions, as we say, which isn't really grammatically accurate. Both does the thing work, and either piloting or trying out one implementation strategy or comparing two. Brian Garner has some really good examples of dual randomize, where you're randomizing both for effectiveness and implementation. Those are super difficult, and he's really good at it. So people need examples. That's where I would look. And so we have the 1, 2, and 3. To me, I like it. It seems simple and clear. And oh my goodness, I think we've confused the bejesus out of people somehow because they're like, is it a 1 or a 2?
Yeah. How do you personally remember? Do you have a mnemonic for knowing which one comes first, which one the type 1 is and the type 3? People get just even confused about that.
And I don't know how.
Do you know how I do it?
Do you actually need a thing to remember?
I do, because I don't know. That's just the way my brain works. So it's hybrid effectiveness / implement or dash implementation.
Yeah.
Effectiveness comes first, therefore it's a hybrid one. Type 1.
Okay. People get really wrapped around the axle about the 1, 2, or 3, and then for a while people weren't putting in what number because they didn't want to be trapped by it, which actually, to be quite honest, makes me violently angry.
Yeah. But really it's just about where you're putting your emphasis, where your primary research question lies.
That's all it is. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And you can thank us because before that paper, we had gone down this path of 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A. We had all these different, trying to make it clearer and more specific. And then at one point we all went, what are we doing? This is a disaster. And we canned all of it and went back to 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
We had this whole, people would have hated it. They would have hated us.
It reminds me of the type 1, type 2 error that nobody can ever remember.
I can't remember that.
I know. And
Don't ask me, please.
It's funny how we go to those things to give them labels and make them feel real and sort of simplify it, but then in the process of simplifying, we make it too confusing and we forget and we have to step back. At least hopefully it's refreshing for listeners to hear that, whether it's sort of methodologically oriented folks like me who are like, I can never remember type 1, type 2 error, and I just have to go back to an Excel spreadsheet and so false positive, false negative, and what. I think it's helpful to hear the same with where people are thinking about hybrid trials and not being able to keep them straight either. And I think it makes it harder when you might think of a trial that doesn't neatly fit into any of those too, right? I'm sure as designs evolve, things don't neatly fit this sort of taxonomy we created.
Yeah, and I tell folks, 1, tell us what number it is, please, for the love of Pete. And then give me 2 sentences why. If you're in your proposal or you're in your paper, it's a hybrid type 1 because we want to see if the thing works. And while we're seeing if it works, we're going to look at implementation variables. tell us what your approach, like I like approach better than study. Like, tell me what your approach is. Give me your justification, because to be honest, I might not agree with you if it's a 1, 2, or 3. And if you have a justification, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'll be like, okay, I see your goal. Because we're doing this systematic review of hybrid papers, which has been going on for far too long, to be quite honest. And part of what we're doing is we're looking, all right, is it a type 1? Do I agree that it's a type 1? And some of them Jeff and I get like wrapped around the axle about, I don't know. Is that part of the intervention, the thing, or is that part like the implementation strategy? Is telehealth DBT, is that the intervention that it's telehealth, or is telehealth the strategy? Like, do I think telehealth changes it? And
Sarah,
I don't
don't get me started, because this is something that's, we've already recorded several episodes this season where I probably get into this in too much detail, but it's an interesting question because that does tangle up the hybrid issue. When you don't know whether what you're doing is an implementation strategy or an intervention, and maybe it's both, then where does the hybridness sit? That's a really interesting question.
Well, and this is going to sound rude. Part of me doesn't care.
Yeah,
like
that's the other thing we say.
I want you as the person doing the work to tell me what you think, and I'll just buy it. Right? If you tell me telehealth fundamentally changes the thing, cool. Then it's part of the thing. If you tell me it's the same, whether it's telehealth, an eye exam is the same on telehealth with all the fancy things versus in person, then it's your strategy. Cool. But just tell us.
Part of the challenge here, again, don't get me started, but now I'm started. You've triggered me. Sorry. Part of the challenge here
is I'm here for.
I love Jeff's paper about implementation science made too simple. However, it is made too simple in the sense that we're using the analogy of the thing, which is great. We always have to use analogies to understand things. That's the way human beings work. Everything we learn is generally an analogy to something we learned before. But interventions are not things. Things are objects. They're nouns. You can hold them and you can define them and you can measure them.
And you can let them down.
And you can let them know. Interventions are processes, and they're extremely complex and they're dynamic. And so a lot of it starts to fall apart when we think we can hold something really that tightly when we can't. And so it creates a lot of challenges. I don't necessarily have an answer. This is something we've been thinking about a lot lately, trying to really operationalize these things in useful ways. But anyway, something I've thought about. I have a real specific question about hybrid trials, and I'm serious about this. I like hybrid trials a lot. We've been using them a lot. Cluster randomized designs, individual designs, been doing all sorts of work lately on this. But one of the things we face is if your implementation strategy is designed to impact fidelity or to impact availability of services or to impact like engagement of the provider adoption, right? Which almost every implementation strategy ultimately is going to try to increase adoption. You are corrupting the intervention side of the trial because suddenly, like if more therapists adopt, there are probably going to be different types of therapists, late adopters, maybe even have less fidelity. Or if your implementation strategy is to increase fidelity, then the people in some arm are going to be delivering the treatment with greater fidelity than others. And so I wonder can there be such a thing as a true type 2, or are you always going to be emphasizing one side or the other? And what sort of things do we need to think about when we're emphasizing one side or the other?
Yeah, that's why I like type 2s, because you're not going to like this answer. I don't care that it like messes up a little bit your effectiveness because you might end up answering the question that's more important, right? So there's a study, and it was before implementation research kind of was a thing. I can't think of the guy's name. It was a behavioral activation study, I think, or CBT for depression, which is horrible. I can't remember which it was. They looked at therapist fidelity and patient outcome. So they're doing a hybrid type 2. They just didn't have that language because it was in the 90s. For folks with mild to moderate depression, the therapists who had pretty good, not great fidelity, they got better. right? Which is awesome to know because that might mean maybe I don't have to hammer down so hard on getting you all to fidelity and keeping you there, right? If pretty good fidelity gets the outcomes we want for patients. And they found that for folks with severe depression, fidelity made a big difference. Like for therapists who weren't to fidelity, they didn't get those outcomes. So if we think of that, like, so that was a hybrid type 2. They were ahead of their time. So I think I want you to F up your clinical trial part a little bit because I want to know that question, right? If I am in charge of the budget for my medical center and you do a cool type 2 and find out you only have to get about like half your therapists to halfway to fidelity to get patients to remit from depression, rad, right? Like I might not have to pay for as much, booster sessions for them, or I might not have to, do all these other strategies. So you might not have your perfect effectiveness trial design. And I mean, I guess I'm an implementation researcher, so I don't know that I really care about what that means. Because I think the more practical question is, okay, now we have a better sense of how much effort do we need to spend on this versus how much effort do we, maybe for those severe depression folks, we find out who has the best fidelity and we send them to that person, right? And we kind of think about how do we maximize the resources we have in our clinic when budgets are tight and, we don't have enough staff and all those things. So I think you get a more practical results, even though they might not be as nice and tidy as you would like them to be. Because also, what if you do a clinical trial, you don't ask those questions in a type 2, and you get to the end and you didn't find out those things, right? Like, what if you made sure everybody was to fidelity all the time and put in a lot of money and effort and time and didn't find out until a lot later, maybe that wasn't that important, right? We could save some time and answer what I think are more important questions. So that I love type 2s. Everybody else hates them, which, you said, don't get me started. I'm like, but they're the best. Like they answer the questions. If my medical center director says, this is what keeps me up at night, how do I make the case for paying for these trainings and these interventions and these things? Is it really going to result in improved depression or remission of depression and less suicide in my facility for my veterans? I want to answer that question because they're going to be like, yeah, that's a nice little clinical trial that was well controlled and that is not where we live. So I love type 2s. I feel like everybody hates their guts and I love them. And I don't have an answer either for the like 60-40, 80-20, 50-50.
Yeah, I don't know
I
who
don't
hate.
care.
I don't know who hates their guts, but let's bring them on the show so I can fight them.
People don't like them. I think people are just like, I can't even comprehend how to do that, and it's too messy, and I don't want it. And I'm like, bring it. Like this is the messy we need to get the answers.
It can be a series of trade-offs. It's like the hybrid backpacks where it's a backpack plus it's a roller bag. It really doesn't do either one great, but it's certainly efficient and you know what I mean? And hybrids, they can get services to the field faster, like without a doubt. And and so but it may mean that you have to make some compromises on one side or the other. And it sounds like you lean towards the implementation side, and I think that's fine. And I think there's some good justification for leaning the other way if like we have less information about the intervention and its effectiveness, and that's where we maybe want to lean. And so maybe we have type 1.9s and type 2.1s or something like that. And
people will hate you if you say that. I'm telling you.
Just leans a little bit in. All right.
If you like, I can tell you, we got to the 1A, 1B, 1C, and we hated ourselves. We were like,
all right. Well, I'm putting my stake in the ground. Come on the show. Fight me.
Well, and I think, right, that the one thing you said that we haven't mentioned, hybrid approaches let you answer questions when the system's going, and it's going with you or without you, right? So it might be, we have a thing that has promising evidence, maybe for suicide, right? Like we need to get this out. It has low risk, high reward possibly, and it would be maybe unethical to not push it out. and the system says we're pushing it forward. Don't we want to be the people who say, hi, would you like me to help you? One, get your implementation better, and also gather some data on, does this thing actually work? Because wouldn't you like to have that data, right? So it lets us capitalize on a system that's moving anyway. We can learn so much with a hybrid. I love hybrids. I mean, duh. And I can tell you if you want another funny story. So when Jeff's original paper came out in 2012 in medical care, I was at the VA in Palo Alto. I was working on these EAP things, like these. We were recording videos about how to talk to veterans with this contracted like production team. And we finish all of our videos. We take the people out to dinner, and the producer person, I'm sitting next to her at dinner, and she said, "Well, I didn't want to tell you all this before you hired me, but my brother does the kind of stuff you all do in the here. His name's Jeff Curran." I'd never met Jeff before. And being the complete dork that I am, I said, "Jeff Curran is your brother?" I reach into my bag, I pull out his paper and tell her his paper is my favorite paper and it just came out and how amazing the paper is. So she calls him from dinner and it's like, "You didn't tell me you had this woman is telling me you have this new paper and it's really great and it's changing the field. You didn't tell us that." So I met his sister before I ever met Jeff and apparently ratted him out to his whole family about how amazing this paper was that he had just published on hybrid
Were they concerned
design.
you were like secretly stalking him and you set up this meeting with his sister surreptitiously?
I'm not that skillful. And I mean, a lot of my life has been I've been at the right place with the right people, but also have a big mouth, right?
And a collection of papers in your bag.
Right? Would you later I was like, did I really pull at a nice dinner, did I really pull out a journal article to be like, this is my favorite paper?
The real question is how many journal articles were in there and how many different people were you prepared to say, this is my favorite paper about or to?
Right.
How prepared
That's when I
were
used to
you?
ride the train. I used to ride the train, and so I would read papers on the way to work, and I'm still a dork. I was gonna say I was a dork, but I'm still a dork.
We just own it.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, this has been great. And I think really we could re-edit this episode and you could just win this section of our of this new game. But we did want to give you dedicated space to rant. So this game that we have, a new game for season 2, is called Don't Get Me Started. And so we'd like you to choose a topic that you would like to rant about for 2 minutes. And Mike and I will ding every time you make a point that we like, resonate with, find interesting, exciting, or even just are impressed by, even if we don't agree. And if you do that, you'll win the prize. Now, the prize is incredibly valuable. It's incredibly scarce. And it is that I will write an out-of-office message for you. So an example out-of-office message that I have written for myself in the past, but I have written these for many prize winners. This is from several years ago where I wrote, "I am out of the office with limited access to emails. I promise it gets better." By that, I mean I'm traveling solo with 2 little kids, so I both don't have a lot of time and even less mental energy to triage and respond to emails. I will do my best, but I'll return to email glory sometime in early November. I hope this auto reply finds you coping with whatever life has thrown your way. So I'm happy to customize it. I always write it by my own spirit, but I'll give you multiple options for out of office for the next time you travel. Again, should you win. So this is what's on the line here.
Ensure that there's a line in there that says that this out of office auto reply was not endorsed by the VA.
Yes.
Right.
Well, we, of course, so I can also add any custom disclaimers that you want. The only thing we require is that that I will mention the podcast in the out of office reply.
Wow.
So Sarah,
That's
don't get you
jazzy.
started. Did you, we sent you this warning ahead of time. What have you thought about? What do you think you'd like to rant about? And then when you're ready to rant, just pause and say, "Don't get me started," and then get going. So what are you going to rant about?
You have to get 8 points in 2 minutes. We were doing 10 points in 2 minutes. I think that was too hard. So we're going to do 8.
This is stressful. Cheesy Pete.
Okay, hang on a second. We have to have a talk about language.
Jeezy Pete doesn't work.
This is not a Mormon picnic here, Sarah.
I actually say Jeezy Pete.
Holy doodle, Sarah.
Holy. What was it that Carrie used to say? Holy
She said
crackers?
holy doodle. Holy doodle.
The holy doodle.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying. Y'all, I got in trouble when I got to Little Rock by how much, like Jeff Curran used to tell people she's a Yankee and she's loud. Um, and he's like, dude, I swear, but you're up there. So I'm like, it's
Yeah.
taken 9 years,
And then you literally went to go work with a bunch of drunken sailors, so it all
right? I
works out.
know.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I don't even know. Can I repeat stuff I've said? That's my
Oh yeah,
question.
Yeah, sure.
sure. Why not?
Okay. Okay. All right, I'll start. So don't get me started. So I will go back to effectiveness implementation, hybrid approaches. I know y'all like to say trials and y'all like to say designs. Um, so I read like a bajillion of these and I will text Jeff Curran and be like, I'm so angry. Like I can't handle, like tell me what freaking type hybrid you're doing. Is it a
Ding.
1, a 2, or a 3? Tell me why. Tell me what the bleep the thing is. Like what's the thing? Does it
Dang.
have any effectiveness? Please, for the love of God. What strategy are you using? Like when they're like, we're going to implement it. With what?
Dang.
How? With who? Um, does your implementation strategy have any effectiveness, any data? Please tell me that.
Ding.
Um, and I think, and this whole, I heard through the grapevine that there was people were getting advice not to say what type it was. Don't say if it's a 1 or 2 or 3. Like, be coy. Um, research grants and papers are not the place to be coy, right? Like, no. Tell
Ding.
me and be specific.
You're not trying to
Um,
pick up a reviewer.
right? Like, hey, it's a hybrid, but I'm not going to tell you what kind. It's up to you to decide. Um, like,
Ding.
and so we're doing the scoping review, and so I'm reading them, and like I'm reading all like 400 papers, and so some of them I think I'm going to write these people a love note because they've said it's a type 1 with this thing, with this data, for this reason, and we're doing it this, and I think I love you.
Ding
Um,
again.
or they're like, it's a hybrid, and they cite Jeff Curran 2012, and then they say nothing ever again about a hybrid. And I'm
Ding.
like y'all, like kind of got to tell us what you're doing. And then I have all the people who are so great. Like, so this is a shameless plug. At this Jeff Center for Implementation Research, we offer free consultations. So if you don't know what stupid hybrid type you are, we will help you. If you don't know how to write it out, we will help you. So I think part of it is if we're all that collaborative in implementation science, don't do those things, right? Like don't go saying just a hybrid.
And that's our 2 minutes. That's
Is it?
that was
Oh,
wonderful.
All right.
I
woohoo!
clearly
Do we
counted
get
at least 8 dings in
points?
there.
Oh,
We
sure.
clearly.
Okay.
I think I might even go up to 10. I don't know.
All right.
Um, that
I
was
Nice
would
wonderful,
like
work.
me
Nice
Sarah.
some.
work.
Excellent rant. You have won our prize, which is me
Woohoo!
writing your next out of office message. So next time you take a trip, if you know you have one upcoming, I can do it now, or you can
I'm
wait
going to
and
Alaska
cash
in a
in.
week and a half.
Okay, perfect.
Wow.
So I will write you an out of office message for
Ooh,
Alaska. Just
I'm so
I'll
excited.
follow up with a little bit of details about like how long you'll be and
How fun.
yeah.
I
Where
want
are
to
you going in
practice.
Alaska?
So I'm actually doing some work with South Central Foundation,
Hmm.
which is Alaska Native American Indian healthcare system, and they're implementing, we're doing a hybrid type 1, and they are implementing an adapted advanced care planning intervention for Alaska Native American Indian folks.
Very
So I'm their
cool.
implementation person. We're going up there with our qual data to do some implementation mapping and pick some strategies.
That's very
Nice.
cool.
Yeah.
Alaska is a very cool place and really could benefit from. I lived there 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, and this availability of healthcare and mental health care is starkly different than many other parts of the country. It's just a
Yeah.
rural healthcare system everywhere, sort of all throughout
Yeah.
this giant state. Yeah.
It's kind of cool. Like the work in Alaska and the work in Arkansas are really similar, but
Hmm.
very different places.
Yeah, very different places, but tons of people passionate about improving,
Yeah.
people's lives there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Mike, Mike, do you want to go into the last few
Yeah,
questions?
sure. It's just some rapid fire questions. So, what are one or two of the most important implementation science publications that you feel like any budding implementation science researcher should read?
Which are in your bag right now?
They Okay, so I have hold on,
A
my stack
signed
right here.
copy of Jeff Curran's paper.
Oh my God. I can do that, and he would be mortified.
Well,
He
now
would
you
hate
have
my
to.
guts. Right now, I'll do it. If someone emails me, I'll do it. So I always recommend there's a 2019 special issue. So it's a collection, it's more than one or two. Psychiatry research. We did a special issue on basically the first paper's on what is implementation science, is the name of the paper. And it's essentially taking implementation science topics from, they would go in a book, and it's a special issue of a journal. So it's shorter, it's easier to read, and it's meant to be more practical. My paper is in there with Sasha McBain and Jeff Curran on hybrids, that gets more in the weeds. And to be honest, it's the paper I needed. So it's the paper I wrote because I was like, I have a lot of questions, Jeff Curran, and I need you to answer them. And we'll write in a paper. So that whole special issue is what I would recommend. It's all open access, so anybody can get to it. The VA paid for all the papers to be open access to make that freely available.
Very cool. That seems like a great special issue, and we will put it in the show notes so anybody can access it. Do you have any shout outs to any special people in your work or personal life besides obviously Jeff Curran?
I have to tell you, like, I'm totally spoiled. So I came to Little Rock from Palo Alto, bit of a culture shock. I came here for the query people and the implementation people. To be quite honest, I didn't know where Little Rock was exactly. I came here to work with Jeff Curran and Joanne Kirchner, who were my two mentors. I have rad mentors, Kate Comtois, Marsha Linehan, Joe, Jeff. I came here, got my first big grant, met my husband, bought a house. My mother moved next door. We adopted an adorable child. Like, Little Rock has treated me very well. So all those, like, I have awesome mentors. My husband puts up with a lot of my shit, which I know you all can imagine. And I have a lot of great people, including my best friend Jenny, who I mentioned, verbally slapped me in the face all those years ago. So I have a lot of rad people in my life.
All right, some mentors who made you cry and friends that slap you in the face. I'm starting to figure you out a little bit more. That's great.
I'm actually pretty easy to like deal with. Like, be like, yeah, get it together.
I like it. I like it. Any social media where people can reach you?
Sure. I'm on Twitter or X at SJ Landis. I'm trying to figure out LinkedIn. So I'm on there if people want to find me. Or tell me how to use it better would be awesome also. And if people, we have free consultation, so you can email me. We also have, shameless plug again, internship and postdoctoral fellowships for psychology or the internship. Our postdoc is any licensed independent provider. So psychology, social work, nursing, and pharmacy, paid research fellowship for 2 years at the VA that I'm a mentor through. So folks are interested in those things, shameless plug that we would love to talk to you and help you do hybrids and say what type they are.
Nice. Excellent. Well, this has just been a fantastic episode, Sarah. I'm definitely nervous about having to bleep out all the words you said, but besides that, I think our audience is going to love this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. I'm sort of, but not really, on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter at @ISPodcast, and Kevin is at KMKing_psych. Kevin is also on Blue Sky at Kevin M. King. All of the comments and opinions expressed during today's show are our own. They are well-reasoned and insightful, and therefore are probably not endorsed by our grant funders or employers. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time. Thank you for calling Enterprise. Where can we pick you up?
Hey, you still got it.
I still got it.